The story of the Buddha is central to the practice of Buddhism, and it's the most embellished, delicious, narrated, talked about story throughout the Buddhist world. And we're talking a little bit today about the story of the Buddha by way of introducing Buddhism. Buddhism grew up in India starting about the 5th century before the Common Era, and grew out of the plethora of religious genius constellated into many systems of practice that we know as Hinduism. So Hinduism is actually a very generalized term. There are many, before the rise of Buddhism in India, there is already sophisticated philosophy about the nature of the mind, the way in which the mind survives death. That's already a given when Buddhism comes onto the scene. The way in which the mind goes forth after death in a manner that accords with what the mind incited by way of actions during one's lifetime. So we already have a theory of karma, a theory of rebirth, and it's not looked on as a happy thing. The prospect of endlessly being sent to some kind of land, some kind of birth, some kind of lifetime, good, bad, one doesn't know, one has no control over it. It's like the ultimate chain gang. You're bound to the wheel of existence, and where it turns, you go. And that's rather appalling, actually, for Hindus as well later as for Buddhists. So a tremendous urgency of practice in India at this time is to get free of this wheel. And what is this wheel? We can think of it in our own language as our own habit patterns, our own ways of doing things that don't serve us. And so the Buddha, who is variously described as an ordinary human being, as a prince, as a reincarnation of previous practitioners, as someone who is really striving to benefit all beings, Bodhisattva. This Buddha appears in India, enters the womb of his mother by design, by his own intention, in an area near, actually right now inside the Lumbini Garden. Well, he's born in Lumbini, and he's a prince of what's known as the Shakya clan. He's well born. So the word Buddha, Bud itself, means to awaken. To awaken means to see one's situation for what it is, and to focus on the two things that human beings and Buddhas and good politicians, princes, focus on, which is how to avoid suffering. How to avoid suffering for ourselves, how to protect others from suffering. This is the whole thrust of the Buddha's journey, and it is for this reason that he teaches what is called the Dharma. Hinduism referred to itself as a Dharma, and Buddhism also refers to itself as a Dharma. The word Dharma, a Sanskrit word, it's from the Sanskrit root dur, and it means, its core meaning is to hold. To hold. So the Dharma, in this sense, is understood as something that holds us. Holds us how? Holds us why? Holds us, keeps us from falling into the pit of suffering that our own actions actually are creating, unless we can, like the Buddha, awaken to our real possibility and our real nature. In a biography of the Buddha written in the 18th century by a Tibetan-speaking lord of the Dharma in Bhutan, Tenzin Chogyal, just recently published, after an opening verse, his first line is this, describing the human predicament. Now, he says, living beings are like the sky. They are limitless. every living being is in essence naturally luminous. That's the third sentence. Every living being is in nature naturally luminous. And in fact, when we look through the Buddha's teachings from the earliest time of Buddhism in India through its spread in the countries of South Asia, and especially in the countries of Northern Buddhism, of Nepal, Tibet, China, Japan, Korea, Mongolia, this teaching that every living being, that means you and me, that means our pets, that means the bugs, that means the birds, every living being has this luminous nature. And to the extent that we are blind to that, to the extent that we have not wakened to that, we are inevitably going to act as if we are not luminous beings, but are rather limited beings, always in danger of failing to acquire what we need and what we want, and therefore always plotting so that we can acquire what we need and what we want, and therefore getting more and more entrapped in this cycle of activities which inevitably bring us into difficulties of one sort or another. So the Buddha's teaching, at the heart of the Buddha's teaching is this dhur, and that which he awakened to is this recognition that what we are is not what we think. What we think normally, when you say I, what usually we have some strong identification with our body and some very strong identification with our roles in life. I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a career person, I'm a professional, I am a ne'er-do-well, I'm someone who never lived up to my potential, I'm someone who's really better than most other people. These are the kinds of identities, and most of us have many identities that we flicker through during the course of a day even, never mind the course of a lifetime. And none of these, Buddha is saying, is what we really are. And yet these are the lesser identities that we wrap our energy around, we wrap our attention around, and we try to live making the most of that particular identity, which is always going to run into the difficulties. And this state of continually creating situations where we are at a loss, where we fail to see what we really are, where we perpetuate this cycle of, our habits going strong, getting stronger and stronger and stronger. This is the subject of a retreat next week. It's called samsara, which means cyclic existence. Because if we take a good look at ourselves, usually what we see is that we have habits. Habits means it's something that we do habitually, mechanically, without really thinking about it. Do you plan always to be exactly 12 minutes late? Do you plan to get too little sleep or eat the wrong things? No, but these are habits. Or say cutting things to other people that ruin your relationship with them, even though you actually value them. We don't plan these things. Or do you plan not to speak up and actually say what is on your mind to someone who would benefit from knowing that because you're trying to have a connection with them? There are all these habits that we have, and the thing about habits is that they reinforce themselves. So the more we do these things, even though they don't work out well for us, the more we do them. And that's a cyclical process, cyclic existence. So waking up means waking up to the fact that these habits, which are done in service of a particular identity, is not the optimal way to go about things, and it's not ultimately a realistic way of going about things, because we are not. You are not limited to your role, whatever your role is in life, and however important it is. And this is not to validate our responsibility and invalidate our responsibilities in life. We have them, but that's not all that we are. Thich Nhat Hanh says, you are not just your suffering. We spend an inordinate amount of time, research shows, mulling over our problems. This is not optimum use of our brain power. And it's also a kind of habit, rumination, the neuroscientists call it, rumination, just kind of dwelling on, the little slights that we've suffered during the day, the animosities that are breeding, or the celebrations of good things that have happened. But none of these really speak to what we are. And we orient our lives around what is lesser than what we are. So every living being is in essence naturally luminous. That might sound crazy to you, or it might actually seem very resonant with your own experience. Because I think sometimes, most of us, even if not most of the time, feel that there's something alive in us that really is quite beyond all of these ordinary tasks and day-to-day worries. There's some kind of awareness that there's somehow we're part of something bigger. I think this is some kind of knowing that there's something in us that we don't quite have access to, and wanting access to that. Some kind of spaciousness, some kind of creativity, some kind of, all of which is luminous. So the Buddha is someone who awakened to the truth of this through his own experience, and actually also really, really cultivated the possibility of a full awakening, which would allow him to share this with others. We're taught, there's many stories of the Buddha emphasize different things. They all, however, emphasize that the reason the Buddha took rebirth, understanding that in his case, unlike in our case, it's a conscious decision, he took rebirth, leaving the highest heavens, because he wanted to be of help. And in this biography, particularly, the one I've mentioned, written in Bhutan, it is specific, but they all talk about this. There's kind of like a convention of ready-to-be awakened ones in the highest heaven. Now we're going into some of the mythology of the story that has kept Buddhists awake and happy throughout the night around campfires around the world for centuries. So the future Buddha, then future Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, Siddhartha, notice that most Buddhas only stayed in the world which they visited for about 7 years. Or they went to the world that they would visit selectively chosen. They would go to the happier worlds. And looking down from the heavens on the entire universe of billions and trillions of world systems, that's Buddhist cosmology, this world, our world, was seen to be a place that was really a place of a lot of suffering, and a place, the Sahaloka it's called in Sanskrit, where the good things are hidden. Your own luminosity is hidden from you. And who was then a bodhisattva, he'd already taken a vow to become a Buddha, he'd already taken a vow to help all beings as much as possible, thought, I will go to that world. Other Buddhas haven't visited there. So it was a kind of asceticism, you might say, that he chose this world, and in his teaching in this world, pointed out that Buddhas, awakened ones, are actually very rare in the world system, in the cosmos at large. There are not a lot of them, he said. It's a very special thing when a world becomes an environment where a Buddha is living. For Buddhists, this is our world. This is a fortunate eon. There have been infinite Buddhas, actually, and particularly this is considered an eon of 1,000 Buddhas, which is not so much a historically verifiable statement as it is a statement of great confidence that we can come into knowledge of our own real nature, our own luminosity. And we will be continuing on First Sundays this story of the Buddha. The power of his intention to be of benefit to others is something that we also take up as practitioners. A Buddha didn't set out to be a Buddhist. Buddha set out, when he was a bodhisattva, somebody with the intention to be of benefit to others, his intention was to awaken, to Bud, to awaken. And to the extent that we are meeting here under the aegis, you might say, of that perspective, we also are seeking to awaken. And that doesn't mean transferring your faith in another tradition. In Asia, Buddha has always, it's spread from India. It's really the one religion in Asia that extensive, Confucianism did some, but Buddhism really was the one tradition in Asia that crossed all the borders. It went from India to South Asia rather quickly, to Thailand, to Burma, to Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and then across the Silk Route and across the sea to China, Korea, Japan, and finally over the hills, the Himalayas, 7th, 8th centuries, in forest to Tibet, spread to Mongolia, of course Nepal, Bhutan. Huge region has been Buddhist, and everywhere it went it encountered other traditions. In India, there was Hinduism, many forms of Hinduism already. In China, there was Taoism and Confucianism. Japan, there was Shinto, and so on. And so in Asia, unlike in the West, has always been and remains quite common for people to participate in different traditions. Quite different than, modern idea that, if you're Lutheran, you're not Presbyterian, never mind. Sharing in a larger traditional view. But this is quite common in Asia. And in fact, as Buddhism is coming in the West, many people are learning from it and still going to church, still going to synagogue. One of the first retreats we did, and I'll close with this, I think, in India, actually in Bodh Gaya, the seat of the Buddha, where the Buddha became enlightened in northwest India, we took several 10-day courses with Goenka, very famous as a teacher of so-called Vipassana meditation. And the first course that I took was in Bodh Gaya, and about a third of the group were nuns, Catholic nuns in full habit. They certainly weren't leaving their religion. And Goenka would often say, if you practice the qualities that lead to awakening, which are basically what we practice here, cultivating attention, cultivating kindness, cultivating wisdom, insight. To cultivate these qualities, he would say, is to become a better human being. And if you're a better human being, you're going to be a better Catholic, a better Presbyterian, a better Lutheran, a better Muslim, a better Sikh, a better Jew, just a human being. So in that spirit, we are very much in service of cultivating these qualities, for which there are many, many careful methods given in Indian, Tibetan, and other Asian traditions of Buddhism. The central moment for the Buddhist story, which we'll be talking about more, is this image here, over on the back by the flowers, is the Buddha. And you see that he's touching the ground with his right hand. He's holding a bowl because he's been an ascetic monk. He's been begging. That's his begging bowl. And he is on the verge of enlightenment right now. He's seated under the tree at Bodh Gaya. He's touching the ground for reasons I'll explain next time to evoke a chorus of support for his project of awakening right now, that very night. In fact, at dawn, dawn is an important time in Buddhism. At dawn, he arises as a fully awakened one. And what we are talking about and what we're also practicing in our next hour comes from the insights of that moment and centuries of human development and reflection and cultivation and experimentation with those very insights and the practices that arose from them. So that's our morning story. You may not be aware that we have started a new custom, and on first Sundays at 10:30, first Sundays, 10:30, we're having half an hour of an introduction to Buddhist life, and we're starting to do that with the story of the Buddha, which we will be continuing first Sunday of October. November. This is October. It's hard to keep up. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll take a minute or two to transfer to our regular 11 o'clock guided meditation, which we have every week, and welcome you to. But I'm here, if informally, if you have a question or two, I would be interested in to know. How many of you are quite familiar with the story of the Buddha? Okay. Here you go. How many of you are quite fresh beginner's mind? Okay. Welcome, beginner's mind. That's wonderful. Thank you. So we hope to repay your kind curiosity over these first Sundays.
When did you start telling the story?
At 10:36 this morning.
Okay.
We were a little late, huh? This was the first one, yeah. And maybe we'll learn how to promote it a little more. We will repeat the important points. You will not miss them. And I think Gary has succeeded. Did you guys manage to tape it or not? Yeah, so it's taped. It's just a little bit. There, we'll also be putting up a list of there's a lot of translations, a lot of versions of the story of the Buddha. John Strong wrote a book about the stories of the Buddha, if you want to Google it, but we'll order some books. Yes, ma'am. Maybe I'll just mention, how many are you here for the first time? Or even second? Oh, welcome. How nice. Nice to see you. So you may wonder, all of the images that are here are traditional paintings, and they are all actually, one way or another, incarnations of the Buddha. The Buddha took many forms, and all of these are images of enlightened beings is one way to understand them. And another way to understand them is that they're symbolic human expressions of qualities, the kinds of qualities that we want to develop